Hello and welcome to Chapter 2. We're covering theories for this chapter for the class Psychology 312, Infant and Adolescent Development. So what is this chapter about? Well, it's going to answer a few questions, such as what is practical about a theory? Do childhood experiences affect the adults they become? Would you be a different person if you grew up in another place or century? And why do we need so many theories? Alright, there's some older grand theories that have already been developed for quite a while, and they were developed by some people you may have heard of, whether or not you had psychology classes, such as Freud. Some people you may not have heard of unless you had psychology classes, such as Pavlov or Piaget. So Freud, his popular theory, he created psychoanalytic theory, focusing on the power of the subconscious. Pavlov created behaviorism, focusing on conditioning, such as Pavlov's dogs. And then there was Piaget. He created cognitive theory, focusing on how and what people think. Lately, newer theories have been developed, such as sociocultural and evolutionary. Sociocultural which takes into account social and cultural aspects, and evolutionary, which looks at how behaviors evolve over time. What do theories do? Theories produce hypotheses. Theories generate discoveries. And theories offer practical guidance. Theories are not facts, are neither true nor false, are neither good nor bad, are useful and give insight. A developmental theory is a group of ideas, assumptions, and generalizations that interpret and illuminate the thousands of observations that have been made about human growth. It provides a framework for exploring the patterns and problems of development. All right, we're going to dive into some theories here and start with Freud. In addition to being the world's first psychoanalyst, Sigmund Freud was a prolific writer. His many papers and case histories, primarily descriptions of his patients' symptoms and sexual urges, helped make the psychoanalytic perspective a dominant force for much of the 20th century. Freud's psychoanalytic theory constructed elaborate and a multifaceted theory. It proposed human development in first 6 years occurs in 3 psychosexual stages characterized by sexual interest and pleasure arising from a body part. Each stage includes its own struggle, and none appear after puberty. All right, another psychoanalytic theory is developed by Erik Erikson. He described 8 developmental stages, each characterized by a challenging developmental crisis. He proposed 5 psychosocial stages which built on Freud's theory but added 3 adult stages. He also emphasized family and culture as opposed to sexual urges. The second grand theory arose in direct opposition to the psychoanalytic notion of the unconscious, and this is behaviorism. Behaviorism led to learning theory, and it focuses on observable behavior and describes the laws and processes by which behavior is learned. Excuse me. And it also deals with conditioning. And it proposes that learning takes place through processes by which responses become linked to particular stimuli. Again, with Pavlov's dogs and the sound and the salivating and the food. All right, behaviorism and classical conditioning demonstrates that behaviors can be learned by making an association between an environmental stimulus and a naturally occurring stimulus. In other words, classical conditioning is the process in which a person or animal learns to associate a neutral stimulus with a meaningful stimulus, gradually reacting to the neutral stimulus with the same response as the meaningful one. I've mentioned Pavlov, and this is the guy at the focus here. Pavlov was a physiologist and a contemporary of Freud. He received the Nobel Prize in 1904 for his digestive processes research, and it resulted in the discovery of classical conditioning. Again, I mentioned Pavlov's dogs. That was the digestive process that he was looking at. All right, and moving on to the next step, John Watson. He's an American psychologist. He was one of the earliest proponents of behaviorism and learning theory. He focused on behavior and suggests only what is observed should be examined. Behaviorism argued that scientists should examine only what they could observe and measure. He proposed anything can be learned with focus on behavior. He did not propose any specific stages of development. All right, still on behaviorism, we'll move on from classical conditioning to operant conditioning. This proposes that reinforcement or punishment may be used to either increase or decrease the probability that a behavior will occur again in the future. It is also called instrumental conditioning. In other words, a learning process in which a particular action is followed either by something desired, which makes the person or animal more likely to repeat the action, or by something unwanted, which makes the action less likely to be repeated. A prominent psychologist for this era is B.F. Skinner. He agreed with Watson that psychology should focus on the scientific study of behavior, and he was best known for experiments with rats, pigeons, and his own daughter. Skinner applied his knowledge to human behavior. For his daughter, he designed a glass-enclosed crib in which temperature, humidity, and perceptual stimulation could be controlled to make her time in the crib enjoyable and educational. He is also the most influential North American behaviorist. And you can see the picture here in the slide. I guess that is the crib that they put their child in. Not sure how I feel about that. All right, moving on through these theories. Now we're going to talk about Albert Bandura. He first described the social learning theory. Social learning theory refers to an extension of behaviorism that emphasizes that other people influence each person's behavior. It proposes that even without specific reinforcement, every individual learns many things through observation and imitation of other people, and this is called modeling. It involves a sense of self-efficacy and proposed a multidimensional approach including differential sensitivity. A good example of this would be maybe some job that you've had, maybe at a fast food joint or something like that, where your training was only so specific or intense and you just kind of picked up things as you went. That would be social learning. All right, we've covered 3 types of learning here. Behaviorism is called learning theory because it emphasizes the learning process. The second grand theory arose in direct opposition to the psychoanalytic notion of the unconscious. Here in this slide you can see this broken down in information here, the type of learning, the learning process, and the result. All right, now we're going to move on to cognitive theory. It proposes thoughts and expectations profoundly affect actions, attitudes, beliefs, and assumption. It focuses on changes in how people think over time. The psychologist associated with this is Jean Piaget. He maintained that cognitive development occurs in 4 major age-related periods or stages. He maintained that cognitive development occurs in 4 major age-related periods or stages: sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operational. Intellectual advancement occurs lifelong because humans seek cognitive equilibrium. This is a state of mental balance. New concepts create disequilibrium, and understanding and learning brings back this balance. All his life, Piaget was absorbed with studying the way children think. He called himself a genetic epistemologist, one who studies how children gain knowledge about the world as they grow up. And would you talk to this man? I look at that picture of him and it just kind of cracks me up. I don't guess he is in any way a threat. And children felt the same way. They loved talking to Jean Piaget, and he learned by listening carefully, especially to their incorrect explanations, which no one had paid much attention to before. All right, going a little bit further, Piaget used scientific observations to form the central thesis of his theory and his stages of children's cognitive development. These stages of development are sensory motor. This is when infants use senses and motor abilities to understand the world they are in. The next stage is pre-operational. This is when children think symbolically with language. Next up is concrete operational. Children understand and apply logic. And the last stage is formal operational. Adolescents and adults use abstract and hypothetical concepts. All right, now we're going to go into a little bit more depth here. A new experience can be jarring and incomprehensible. The resulting experience is one of cognitive disequilibrium, an imbalance that initially creates confusion. Disequilibrium leads to cognitive growth because it forces people to adapt their old concepts. Piaget describes two types of adaptation: assimilation and accommodation. Assimilation is that experiences are interpreted to fit into or assimilate with old ideas. Accommodation occurs when old ideas are restructured to include or accommodate. Again, cognitive equilibrium or disequilibrium is a state of mental balance or imbalance. All right, a person's stage of cognitive growth influences how he or she thinks about everything, including flowers. So, how to think about flowers? Can you identify the Piagetian stage at which each person is thinking about flowers here in these three images? For the first image here, to an infant in the sensory motor stage, flowers are known through pulling, smelling, and even biting. And the next picture, at the concrete operational stage, children become more logical. This boy can understand that flowers need sunlight, water, and time to grow. In the last picture, at the adult's formal operational stage, flowers can be part of a larger logical scheme, for instance, to earn money while cultivating beauty. As illustrated by all three of these photos, thinking is an active process from the beginning of life until the end. All right, we're going to move on to information processing theory. We're still under cognitive theories here. The information processing theory represents a newer version of cognitive theory. It compares the human thinking process, by analogy, to computer analysis of data, including sensory input, connections, stored memories, and output. Information processing theory focuses on the processes of thought. That is, when, why, and how neurons fire before a response. Neurons reach out to other neurons, shown here in the expansion microscopy photo that was impossible even a decade ago. The latest techniques to study the brain have produced insights from neuroscience on the sequence and strength of neuronal communication. This research has uncovered patterns beyond those traced by early information processing theory. Combining brain research and cognitive insights leads to a new understanding of cognition. Apparently, adults who had problems paying attention when they were children have learned to focus when they need to, but they do it in their own way and with more effort. Sustained attention to this task required more brain power and that would be represented by the lit areas of the brain for those with ADHD. Notice also that certain parts of the brain were activated by the healthy adults and not by the ADHD adults. Details of brain scans require interpretation from neurologists, but even the novice can see that adults who have been diagnosed with ADHD, the second line of images, reacted differently in this experiment when they were required to push a button only if certain letters appeared on a screen. Basically shows that the person with ADHD has to work harder to pay attention, but that it is possible to pay attention, and that they train themselves over time to do it. Inside the brain, measuring mental activity. Contemporary neuroscientists use electrodes, magnets, light, and computers to measure brain activity. They also study cognitive processes between input and output. They use many measurement techniques that are available today, and here is a list of them. The first is the EEG, that is an electroencephalogram. Then there's the ERP, the event-related potential. An MRI, which is magnetic resonance imaging. The fMRI, which is functional magnetic resonance imaging. The PET, or PET scan, is the positron emission tomography. And FNIRS is functional near-infrared spectroscopy. And DTI, which is diffusion tensor imaging. Variations within and between people make it difficult to know what someone is thinking via brain scans. This confirms the need for theory. Without an idea of what to look for, or what it might mean, the millions of data points from all brain images might lead to the same trap as earlier measurements of the skull: human bias. All right, newer versions of cognitive theory tend to be multicultural and multidisciplinary. They propose human development results from dynamic interaction between a developing person and their surrounding society. And it views culture as integral to development every day through the social context. All right, we're going to move on to sociocultural theory. This theory proposes thoughts and human development result from the dynamic interaction between a developing person and their surrounding society. It also focuses on culture as integral to a person's development. Prominent psychologist for this era is Lev Vygotsky. He described an interaction between culture and education, and developed concepts of apprenticeship in thinking and guided participation. All cultural patterns and beliefs are social constructions, not natural laws, according to sociocultural theorists. They find customs to be powerful, shaping the development of every person. And they also find that some assumptions need to shift to allow healthier development of all people. All right. We're going to discuss more about Vygotsky here. We're going to discuss the magic middle. Somewhere between the boring and the impossible is the zone of proximal development, where interaction between teacher and learner results in knowledge never before grasped or skills not already mastered. It is a process of joint construction. New knowledge is obtained through mentoring. In general, mentors, attuned to ever-shifting abilities and motivation, continually urge a new level of competence. Learners ask questions, show interest, and demonstrate progress, thereby guiding and inspiring the mentors. When education goes well, both are fully engaged and productive within the zone of proximal development. The intellectual excitement of the zone is the origin of the joy that both instruction and study can bring. Particular skills and processes vary enormously from culture to culture, but the overall social interaction is the same. All right, the sociocultural perspective influences inclusion of culture into contemporary research, and sheds new light on cultural differences in many areas, including attachment, gender, and ethnic prejudice. All right, we'll move on to the evolutionary theory. It integrates modern psychological principles and evolutionary biology. It suggests humans have two long-standing biologically based drives: survival and reproduction. It proposes concept and selective adaptation, and posits genetic variations are particularly beneficial when a change in environment benefits humanity as a whole. Selective adaptation is a process by which living creatures, including people, adjust to their environment. Genetic variation among humans and inherited flexibility. Genes that enhance survival and reproductive ability are selected over generations to become more prevalent. This enables humans to survive and multiply. This is probably true not only for biological traits, but also for traits that originate in the brain. All right, selective adaptation illustrated. Suppose only one of 9 mothers happened to have a gene that improved survival. The average woman had only one surviving daughter, but this gene mutation might mean more births and more surviving children, such that each woman who had the gene bore 2 girls who survived to womanhood instead of just one. As you can see here in this chart, in 100 years, the odd gene becomes more common, making it the new normal. What theories contribute? Well, psychoanalytic theories have made us aware of the impact of early childhood experiences, remembering or not, on subsequent development. Behaviorism has shown the effect that immediate responses, associations, and examples have on learning, moment by moment and over time. Cognitive theories have brought an understanding of intellectual processes and how our thoughts and beliefs affect every aspect of our development. Sociocultural theories have reminded us that development is embedded in a rich and multifaceted cultural context and is evident in every social interaction. Universal theories stress that human differences are less significant than those differences that are shaped by all humans in every place and era. And lastly, there's an eclectic approach, and is held by most developmentalists. It occurs when aspects of each of the various theories of development are selectively applied rather than adhering exclusively to just one of the theories. This has helped guard against bias and facilitates open-mindedness to alternative explanations for the complexity of human life. And that concludes the lecture for Chapter 2.